Bennett from the Australia Institute and Evan Mulholland from the Institute of Public Affairs. Welcome to you both this afternoon.
G'day.
Thanks for having me.
So the first Sunday of the election campaign, it's always telling, isn't it, when there's a bit of time on their hands and they're out and about. Both leaders gave rousing speeches in marginal seats today. We saw Bill Shorten in the Sydney seat of Reid with his deputy, Tanya Plibersek. And we saw Scott Morrison in Brisbane with Liberal Party heavyweights, quite a few of them there, including Treasurer Josh Frydenberg and Peter Dutton. What did you make of their speeches today? Ebony, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it's no surprises that they've ended up in marginal seats, and I think Labor clearly is focusing on health and one of its key strengths in the NDIS, which it helped usher in, and there's no surprises there, probably on either side. I do think probably this week Labor's probably won that first week of the campaign. They've lost fewer candidates, and if we look at who was with the Prime Minister making his speech today with Peter Dutton, there's certainly no one on the Labor front bench who's insulted people with disabilities, for example. But I thought it was really interesting this morning, Nikki Sava mentioned that the coalition is really going to have to stick to the economy when it comes to this election, because on so many other issues it just puts them into hopeless division. And I think that's something we'll probably see play out over the next couple of weeks, and they might even run into some trouble on that. For example, Matthias Cormann this morning was asked by David Spears, they've got costings for the Labor Party's taxes, but he couldn't put a figure on how much the coalition's income tax cuts package would cost or how much is going to people earning over $180,000 a year, the highest income earners. So we're only at the first week, but I think already, you know, some key fronts and key battlegrounds are opening up on the campaign.
Yeah, and Evan, I guess, as Ebony says, no surprise that they've both headed straight for those marginal seats. That's what you do.
Yeah, exactly, and it's not surprising to see the Prime Minister in Queensland. If the coalition is to win the election or even get close, it needs to not only hold Queensland but actually go forward and win seats in Queensland. So you've got seats like Herbert up in North Queensland, where the Adani mine is, that the coalition seems to be increasingly confident about. The more the coalition, I think, talk about the economy, the better. So I think I'd agree with Ebony on that sense. The more they can sort of hammer Labor's taxes and talk about how they're better for the economy, the better they'll go. On the Matthias Cormann interview and the tax front, as he said, the top 20% of income earners pay 60% of all income tax. So it's a no-brainer that the majority of money coming back through from the taxes will go to the people that have actually paid the most tax. When you consider the bottom 40 or 50% of income earners don't pay any net tax at all once you take into account welfare spending. So the more the coalition can hammer that line and talk about how their tax cuts are the better tax cuts and how they're more would be better to manage the economy, the better they'll be. If people are going into the voting booth thinking about the economy, I think the coalition will do well. If they're going in and thinking about other issues, then they'll probably go Labor.
If we're going to have a look, a long time in politics, as we know, but during the week, once the campaign was announced, we saw both sides putting out a couple of little bushfires. First of all, Labor's star MP, Melissa Park, standing down after making anti-Israel comments. Those comments came to light. Now, the party line is that she stood down to, quote, avoid being a distraction. Would you say that's the right call?
I think it's an understandable call from Labor. It's a very cautious approach that they're taking here, and I think they're being very careful not to trip just before they hit the finish line, so to speak. I think it's important to underline that Melissa Park's comments, there's a difference between being critical of Israel and anti-Semitic comments, and I don't think her comments have crossed the line there at all. But I do think you're seeing an overabundance of caution from Labor when it comes to her resigning her candidacy. And as for the other couple of candidates that the coalition lost due to Section 44 problems, this election. I think until the Parliament can resolve those Section 44 issues and do something about that constitutional provision, we're going to see more and more candidates and sitting MPs still coming across these problems because we're a migrant community. And, for example, Tim Hollow, the Greens candidate for Canberra, had potential 7 dual citizenships and had to spend 14 months making sure he had no problems because his family on both sides had fled at various times Hitler, Stalin and the Cultural Revolution in China. That's just one person's family. So these are big issues for candidates, and that current provision, I think, excludes a lot of people from running for Parliament at the moment, and it still remains unresolved.
Yes, it certainly creates a minefield. Evan, what do you think about, we've talked about Section 44, but also Melissa Park's decision to stand down. Did that have to happen?
Yeah, well, Melissa Park's views on Israel have been known for some time, and I think she does cross the line in a lot of the things she said. The conspiracy theory about ADF soldiers forcing a pregnant woman to drink bleach have been disproven over and over again, yet she's been on the record still peddling those tinfoil hat conspiracy theories. I think they definitely crossed a line. I think it also shows that Bill Shorten and the Labor Party are very strict and don't want to take any chances in terms of candidates going out of their way to distract from the campaign. On the Section 44 issues, I understand that in many of the, I think 3 of the seats where candidates had to pull out, or they've gone out of their way to put other candidates in, and in those seats they weren't exactly winnable. I think they're all safe Labor seats.
So, meanwhile, Peter Dutton, another bushfire having to be put out there, he was forced to apologise to his political opponent, Ali France, for saying that she's, quote, using her disability as an excuse for not living in the electorate. What I think is interesting here is that Christina Keneally seems to have been called in to play bad cop, calling Dutton toxic and a thug for making those comments. We didn't see Bill Shorten. He steered clear of it. Was that a strategic move, Ebony?
Yeah, I think it's that attack dog position. It's always useful to have someone like that. Tony Abbott used to play that role for John Howard, for example. And Christina Keneally has proven herself to be an extremely effective communicator in the Senate since she joined it. And I think has gone off to a great start on this campaign playing that role. I think a lot of the messages that she had for Peter Dutton cut through, and it was only half an hour after she made those comments, I think, that he was forced to issue an apology. And I thought it was interesting the wording that she used around that as well, calling Peter Dutton toxic within the Liberal Party. There'd be a huge number of Liberal voters who remember his role in bringing down Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister. He is known as a bully, and it's only last year that we saw several members of the Liberal Party allege about bullying within the Liberal Party. A couple of MPs quit over it. And I think these comments this week are toxic. The average person would see them as such. And I think it's a real shame it took him as long as it did to apologise. I think that really negates the apology in itself. And I think it's a real shame that Scott Morrison didn't ask him to apologise after hearing those comments either. So I think a bit of a failure of leadership on both their parts this week there.
Evan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I think Peter Dutton was right to apologise. It's disappointing to take the debate away from policy or the point you're trying to make and bring someone's disability into it. I think that was beyond the pale. Leaving that aside, I think there's a broader point to make, which is probably what he was trying to make, about the amount of Labor MPs and aspiring candidates that don't actually live in their electorate. Mark Dreyfus, for example, the member for Isaacs, lives his entire time he's been a member and still lives in Higgins. The Higgins candidate for Labor, Fiona McLeod, lives in Fitzroy and said this week that even if she does win, she doesn't know whether she's going to move or not. I think that shows a disdain for their electorates that they're trying to serve, and that's the place, the better off place in terms of making that argument. In terms of Christina Keneally, I think her remarks were particularly toxic and mean-spirited. Peter Dutton doesn't have any of her factional backers in jail, and I think it's a questionable point that Christina Keneally is some sort of campaign spokesman or going along with Bill Shorten. New South Wales voters in particular have a long memory, and to see Christina Keneally besides Bill Shorten will put that in voters' minds when they're going to vote. New South Wales is a place where a few months ago Labor were looking at picking up quite a few seats. Now after the New South Wales election, not so much.
Was it a strategic decision by Bill Shorten to get Christina Keneally to play that bad cop role?
I think, yeah, it absolutely would be. In election campaigns, it's not often the leader that will do the attack dog position. As Ebony said, Abbott did it for Howard. In Abbott's campaign, he had other people like Scott Morrison who did it for him. So it's not a usual thing to see the leader doing the attacking.
So meanwhile, we've got Julia Banks saying that Malcolm Turnbull's son Alex has had a hand in her campaign, helping the former Liberal turned independent to unseat Health Minister Greg Hunt. It's been called Independence Inc. Is Alex a force to be reckoned with, Ebony?
Well, I think none of this would come as any shock to anyone who's been following Alex on Twitter, that he's supporting some of these independents. He's targeting and helping people who are opposing the government that brought down his father, and particular candidates who had a role in that. And I think anyone who's got a dad can probably understand why he would do so. And it's unclear that there's anything untoward being alleged here. But I think it does point to the fact that independents, they have a really rough trot compared to major party candidates. They've got no institutional backing. They've got to build their campaigns from the ground up. And there is a lot of legal and technical hurdles to clear to make sure that their campaigns are squared away. So I think on the one hand, it's completely understandable why Alex Turnbull would be involved in these independents campaigns. And on the other hand, I think it makes sense where the independents have worked so well together in Parliament that they would be working together effectively outside Parliament as well, or at least sharing campaign tips and infrastructure where that's feasible or reasonable to do so. So I believe it's been referred to the AEC, but I can't see that there's anything untoward being alleged so far. And as I said, I think it's perfectly understandable why Alex Turnbull's involved in the way that he is.
What about you, Evan? Any surprises to see Alex Turnbull pop up in this way?
Not at all, not at all. And as Ebony said, on Twitter, you can tell he's got no he carries no favours for the government. He's had some particularly nasty tweets in the past, and I think he talks about vested interests, but he's the ultimate corporatist. Here we have a Singapore hedge fund manager who is allegedly invested in renewables, pushing candidates that will might make him more money. And I think with the independents, I think from a strategic point of view, what's clear is that the broad, hard green left have abandoned the vehicle of the Greens party in order to attain power and influence. The Greens political party is a party that's been hovering around 10 to 12% for a few decades now, and it's quite clear that many in that movement are backing now teal independents in order to attain influence and power under the smokescreen of forward-looking or liberal-looking independents, when many of them aren't liberal at all. Zali Steggall even admitted she hadn't voted Labor all of her life. So I think the voters will end up seeing more of these independents and their agenda once more scrutiny is put on.
All right, it's hard to believe the fun has just begun. 5 weeks to go. We do thank you both very much for your time this afternoon, Ebony and Evan.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Turning to other news, in US southern states are bracing for a dangerous storm front fast approaching the region. Authorities have issued a tornado warning as strong winds and hail start to hit.
A dangerous storm front taking aim at the south. Strong winds and hail hitting parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and Texas. A tornado ripped through hard-hit Franklin, Texas. That's about 150 miles south of Dallas. Trees plucked off the ground and roofs torn off buildings. Cars were overturned and power lines toppled. Electricity knocked out throughout the community. Several people were injured.
The winds was knocking motorists off the road and into the ditches.
In Alto, Texas, the powerful storm brought life-threatening winds and plenty of damage. It is now moving through the southern part of the country.
We are asking a mandatory curfew take effect tonight, starting at 8 p.m. till 7 o'clock in the morning. We don't want any kind of foot traffic, any kind of vehicle traffic through the affected areas in Franklin.
In Louisiana, severe storms moving in quick.